There are thousands of ways to die, and some of them are, unfortunately, pretty stupid. The cases in this video prove it because today we're showing you more than 30 people who died far too young because of small acts of stupidity or unfortunate mistakes. On top of that, we've also got a few extremely bizarre deaths, so tragic that they shocked the entire world. We're starting right away with a case that really happened in Boston in the year 2005 and was even reenacted on a TV show about the dumbest deaths. At the time, an American man named Max Bierce worked as a professional fart trainer, and yes, that really does exist. He was known for being able to make his body produce huge amounts of gas through self-invented exercises and special foods, and then release it loudly on command. He passed this knowledge on to a young man named Arnold, a member of a college fraternity, because Arnold wanted to win a farting contest at his fraternity. While Max was training Arnold, he decided to test his abilities and lit a lighter behind him so Arnold could fart and create a burst of flame. But apparently the training had worked a little too well. During the test, the flame became so massive that Max caught fire and later died from his severe burns. Now let's move on to Chanchal Lahiri, who under his stage name Jadagar Mandrake was a well-known magician in India. In the year 2019, the 40-year-old had come up with a particularly spectacular trick. He had several people bind him with heavy steel chains secured by padlocks and then wrap him in ropes as well. After that, Mandrake had himself lowered from a ferry into the Ganges River. His plan was to free himself underwater at lightning speed and then resurface to the applause of the spectators. Instead, he vanished into the murky water, and even after the crowd had waited for more than 10 minutes, nothing happened. His body was finally found in the river one day later. The next death on our list is just as tragic as it is avoidable, because it was completely stupid. Seriously, would you hand an Uzi to a 9-year-old child? That is exactly what a firearms instructor at a shooting range in the USA did a few years ago. The man wanted to show a little girl how to fire at targets with a fully automatic weapon. To do that, he explained the weapon's functions to the 9-year-old and showed her how to handle it properly and what stance to take while shooting. But the recoil of the Uzi was too strong for such a small girl, so the weapon kicked upward while she was firing and fatally struck the instructor. And while the little girl can't be blamed in this case, the next two people in this video who completely misjudged the power of firearms were actually two adults. 5 years ago, the two American YouTubers Mona Lisa Perez and Pedro Ruiz came up with a particularly daring and above all stupid stunt to impress their followers. For the YouTube video, Pedro held a thick book in front of his chest, and Mona Lisa then wanted to shoot her own boyfriend from just 30 centimeters away. The two thought the bullet would, just like in the movies, stop inside the book. But it didn't. And so the pregnant YouTuber really did kill her partner right in front of her friends and their small child. Now let's move on to the next case. In the year 2018, the Christian missionary John Allen Chow visited North Sentinel Island near India, despite every warning and the strictest possible ban. North Sentinel Island is completely cut off from the outside world, and its inhabitants are an indigenous people who completely reject contact with outsiders. More specifically, the Sentinelese had attacked and killed everyone who had dared approach their island up to that point. That is why it is completely forbidden to come within 3 kilometers of the island. But John Allen Chow ignored all of those warnings and was fully convinced that he would succeed in turning them into peaceful people. But the moment he got near the island, arrows were fired at him. John Allen Chow managed to escape, but he came back the next day where he was attacked again. Any normal person would probably have given up at that point at the very latest, but John Allen Chow actually made a third attempt to visit the island and was ultimately killed. Now let's move on to a man who pushed things so far in pursuit of internet success that he risked his life for it. We're talking about the TikToker Waffler69, whose real name was Taylor Smith. Taylor had more than 1.7 million followers on TikTok, and until the beginning of this year, mainly entertained his fans by stuffing bizarre foods into himself in huge quantities. Even though that in itself is not all that unusual on the internet, and trends like so-called mukbang are watched by millions of people, Waffler69 took it one step further. He ate the unhealthiest things imaginable, like huge amounts of deep-fried sausages, giant burger towers, or even an XXL sugary cereal ring. But that giant sugar ring was sadly also the last thing Taylor ever ate, because in January he had to be admitted to the hospital and died there from blocked arteries at the age of just 33. Alexander Chechik from Russia, the next man on our list, absolutely deserves an honorary place on the list of the dumbest deaths ever. A few years ago, the young man from the city of Labinsk in southwestern Russia wanted to show off in front of a friend. So he sent him a text message with a picture of himself holding a hand grenade with the pin already pulled. Alexander believed he could simply put the pin back into the grenade and that it couldn't explode as long as he didn't throw it. Stupid people usually have absolutely no idea just how stupid they really are. Alexander's friend immediately realized how serious the situation was and wrote back in shock, warning him that he absolutely had to be careful. But Alexander's friend never got a reply because by then the grenade had already torn him apart. Moving on, we come to the corporate lawyer Gary Hoy from Canada. Gary Hoy was very successful in his profession and had a sleek office on the 24th floor of the Toronto Centre, a huge glass high-rise in the middle of the Canadian city. Since the lawyer had also studied engineering before going into law, he believed he knew that the large floor-to-ceiling windows in his office were absolutely unbreakable, and so Gary Hoy kept entertaining himself by hurling himself full force against the glass in front of stunned clients and visitors just to scare them. He did it again and again, and nothing ever happened. But when the corporate lawyer had a few friends visiting his office in the year 1998, they didn't believe that the window panes were really as sturdy as Gary claimed. So he took a run-up and jumped at the window. And once again, the glass held. But the entire pane flew out of its frame because the frame had already been damaged by the earlier jumps, and Gary fell a full 24 stories to his death. Since he was the most successful partner at his law firm, the firm ultimately had to close shortly after the lawyer's stupid death. Now let's move on to an unbelievably stupid death that happened in the year 2001 in the Mojave Desert in the state of California. One evening in April, a young man named Randy decided right there in the desert to take some illegal substances and then enjoy nature while high. While there, he came across a group of so-called furries. These are people who dress up as different animals. The furries were also throwing a wild party, and things were getting pretty heated. And when Randy wandered off a little to the side, he spotted someone in a bear costume through his drugged-up haze and decided he wanted to hook up with them. So Randy made a move on the bear. Unfortunately for him, this was not a furry, but a real bear, which immediately bit the completely intoxicated man, and Randy did not survive. Let's continue with a tragic event that took place in 2015 at the American amusement park Cedar Point in Ohio and shook the entire USA. Back then, a teacher named James Young was visiting the amusement park with his 9th grade class during their annual trip. There, he got on a roller coaster called Raptor, which, with its many inversions and a height of 45 meters, is definitely not for the faint of heart. But the roller coaster ride itself was not the problem at all. It was only when getting off that James realized he had lost his phone during one of the loops. From outside, he could even see through the fence exactly where the phone was lying. So he asked the staff if he could quickly climb over the fence to get it, but they told him he should wait until the end of operating hours so he wouldn't interrupt the ride cycle and wouldn't get too close to the tracks. But he didn't want to listen, so he simply climbed over the fence himself and picked up his phone near the track. And then disaster struck. He was hit by a passing car traveling at the full speed of 92 kilometers per hour. Sadly, no one could help him anymore, and he died instantly. To this day, all of his relatives are probably still asking themselves why he couldn't just wait until the ride had shut down. Equally terrible was what happened in 2021 to the 57-year-old YouTuber Thor Eckhoff from Norway. He did something people are usually warned about as children, because it is not only very dangerous but often also completely reckless, and that is walking on unsafe ice. But let's start from the beginning. Thor Eckhoff was actually an ordinary factory worker who kept taking his nearly 1.4 million fans along on his trips through the Norwegian wilderness. He went on road trips through the mountains, hiked through snowy regions, and traveled by boat across the picturesque lakes of his country. On the surface, these were just beautiful things, and because he was also extremely experienced when it came to exploring nature, no one would have thought that his life would suddenly end in such a tragic way. But in November 2021, on his birthday of all days, he headed to the Jakobs Dam in Kongsberg, a lake that often freezes over in winter. There, despite relatively mild temperatures, he went out onto the ice in order to cut a hole in it with a chainsaw. He then wanted to swim in that hole and prove his resistance to the cold. But it ended in tragedy. After a few minutes, when he tried to get back onto the ice, it had become so unstable because of the warm temperatures that it kept breaking whenever he tried to pull himself up. So Eckhoff couldn't get out of the freezing water and fought with all his strength to survive. But it was too late. He was eventually rescued by boat and taken to the hospital, but he died there because he had been hypothermic for too long. But people can also lose their lives through things that are actually completely harmless. For example, by drinking water. In August 2023, the American mother Ashley Summers drank 1.9 liters of water in temperatures above 30 degrees. That is admittedly a lot, but what happened afterward was something no one expected. Her body simply could not handle that amount of fluid and completely collapsed, to the point that even in the hospital she could not be revived. But this is actually not the only case of its kind. Again and again, people die after drinking too much water because their kidneys cannot process that amount of fluid. The rest of the body then begins to fail because it can no longer be properly supplied with oxygen and blood. Unforeseen consequences also came from a live stream by the then 13-year-old teenager Malachi Hemphill, who really just wanted to show his friends things he had lying around at home on Instagram. Alongside everyday items, however, at some point he picked up a firearm, and it quickly became clear that he could not control it properly. But no one would have expected him to accidentally disengage the safety and then look down the barrel as well. With the pistol pointed at himself, it suddenly went off, and the shot killed the teenager instantly. At first, his friends on the live stream thought it was some kind of crazy prank, but they quickly realized they had just seen their friend for the last time. Next, let's go to England. More specifically, to the small town in North Yorkshire, where in the year 2005, a tragedy occurred that shook the whole country. Back then, a group of students set out to explore some of the surrounding caves, just as they did every year. What was new this time was that for the first time they dared to enter the so-called Manchester Hole, a shaft that goes 12 meters underground and contains a breathtaking limestone cave system below. From that cave, numerous extremely narrow tunnels branch off in all directions, and you can only force your way through the muddy constrictions with great difficulty. Even so, that didn't stop the students from continuing to go deeper underground. At one point, they even had to crawl in order to reach a certain underground chamber, and that was exactly what became the undoing of one of the students, a boy named Joe Lister. While the boys were inside the cave system, it started raining outside, which meant the chambers underground began filling with water more and more. At some point, a real flood set in, and the students somehow had to try to get back out of the cave. In a panicked race against time, they swam through the now flooded passageways before finally making it back out into the open air. But Joe Lister was not so lucky. He became stuck in one of the passages and drowned. A trip like this probably should never have been allowed to happen. One way or another, it marked the tragic end of an entirely ordinary boy. Another person who probably couldn't really judge risk properly was Austin Howell, a climber who over the years had repeatedly completed breathtaking routes in the mountains and posted videos of them online. In the climbing scene, he kept drawing attention with extreme stunts, for example in 2017, when he climbed a 100-meter rock face in North Carolina completely naked. His fans quickly realized that he was different from other climbers. In 2018, among other things, Howell announced that he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which repeatedly caused depressive and manic phases for him. It was also during this time that he began climbing without a rope or any other protection at all, which of course massively increased the risk of falling, even though he really was an unbelievably good climber and planned his routes very carefully. Even after he had already fallen 10 meters in a climbing gym and really should have stopped, in 2019 he set out on a trip to the notorious Short-Off Mountain in North Carolina, which many people said it was absolutely insane to climb without a rope. Both his best friend and his father tried to stop him, but on that very trip he fell unprotected from a height of 25 meters. It was the sad end of an extremely talented free climber. We now come to a tragic case that shows how dangerous extreme esoteric beliefs can become in some cases. We're talking about a young German man named Finn Bogomil. As a young adult, Finn Bogomil became heavily involved in esoteric ideas and ended up becoming a follower of the concept of inedia, or light nourishment. The idea behind this esoteric concept is that it is supposedly possible for human beings to give up food and water entirely. Instead, under certain conditions, the body is said to be able to draw its energy only from subtle sources like sunlight and air. The supposed benefits are said to be greater spiritual energy and purity. Even though there is no medical or biological evidence for this concept of living on light, Finn believed in it so strongly that in 2019, he traveled into the Caribbean jungle to fast so intensely that he would become what is known as a light eater, in other words, a person who can live without food and drink. But during that fast, the worst possible tragedy occurred. After several weeks without anyone hearing from him, Finn was found lifeless at a small camp in the rainforest. He had literally dehydrated himself to death through fasting. May he rest in peace, and may his death serve as an example of how important it is to question esoteric and other cults critically. Next, let's come to the tragic story of Pedro Aguayo Ramirez. Born in the year 1979 as the son of the famous Mexican wrestler Pedro Aguayo Damian, little Pedro had wanted from early childhood to follow in his father's footsteps. To do that, he trained hard, and at the age of just 15 was already regularly in the ring, and because of his outstanding performances, he was even named Rookie of the Year back then. He was always trained by his father, with whom he later even performed together in wrestling shows. But Pedro Jr., who fought under the ring name Perito, was by no means overshadowed by his father, because by the year 2015, the now 35-year-old was a true professional wrestler who had already been booked almost daily for shows for an incredible 20 years. His successful career really could have continued for many more years. But fate had other plans, because on March 20th, 2015, Pero was to step into the ring for the last time. At the Crash Lucha Libre event in Tijuana, he faced Rey Mysterio together with Manic. During the match, Mysterio used, among other moves, a dropkick on Pero. Normally a fairly standard kick, but in this case Pero's head was struck. After that, Mysterio prepared for his finishing move, which Pero was supposed to dodge according to the choreography. But Pero, who had flown into the ropes after the kick, was hanging there motionless. At that point, everyone present still assumed he had merely been knocked unconscious for a brief moment. That's why a promoter at ringside tried to wake Pero up again, but without success. After the fight between Mysterio and Manic continued for about another minute, those involved realized something was very, very wrong, and the show was abruptly stopped. After the paramedics on site unsuccessfully tried to revive Pero, he was eventually rushed to the nearest hospital. But when they arrived there, the doctors could do nothing but confirm Pero's death. A later autopsy revealed that he had suffered cardiac arrest as a result of spinal trauma. That means that no matter how quickly the doctors had acted, Pero would not have been able to survive such a severe injury. Let's continue with the case of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, which in the year 2021 triggered a worldwide media frenzy. But what had happened? During filming for the Western movie Rust, lead actor Alec Baldwin was supposed to fire a shot from a historical weapon on set. But instead of the usual blank ammunition, there was a real bullet in the revolver, which then grazed director Joel Souza's arm and struck cinematographer Halyna Hutchins directly in the chest. After Hutchins staggered around for a few steps, she said, "That's not good, that's really not good." And that was it. Although the 42-year-old was flown as quickly as possible by helicopter from the filming location in Santa Fe to a hospital in Albuquerque, she still died that same day. Hutchins, who originally came from Ukraine, left behind a 9-year-old son and her husband. In addition, filming was suspended indefinitely at first, not least because alongside the police investigation, numerous lawsuits were also filed. Because Hutchins' widower sued Baldwin, who was also a producer on the film. Baldwin in turn sued the armorer, an assistant director, a prop master, and the weapons supplier responsible. The armorer also sued a prop assistant, whom she blamed for handing out the wrong ammunition. In the meantime, at least Hutchins' husband and Baldwin were able to reach an out-of-court settlement, and almost all of the other lawsuits were also dropped. Nevertheless, responsibility has still not really been fully clarified to this day. The filming for Rust, by the way, resumed at the beginning of this year with a new cinematographer. Halyna Hutchins is still supposed to be credited as cinematographer in the end credits, however, so that any awards for her work can also be granted posthumously. But for her family, that is surely only a small consolation. Next, let's move on to the dramatic and world-famous case of orca trainer Dawn Brancheau. But before we tell you about the terrible day of the accident on which Dawn lost her life, let's first take one more quick look at the American woman's biography. Because much like wrestling pro Pero, Dawn already knew in childhood that one day she wanted to work as an animal trainer, just like her mother. After earning her degree in biology and psychology, she started her first job in 1994 as an animal caretaker for seals and dolphins. 2 years later, she started working at SeaWorld, where her great dream finally came true and she was allowed to train orcas. During her decades of work with the orcas, she also came into contact with an especially unusual orca named Tilikum. The animal had been classified as behaviorally disturbed and had already been involved in 2 fatal incidents at other parks. But Dawn managed to win Tilikum's trust, and over the years the two became a truly well-coordinated team, right up until February the 24th, 2010. On that day, Tilikum and Dawn were performing their usual tricks and routines during a dinner show. But seemingly out of nowhere and without any cause, Tilikum suddenly pulled his longtime trainer into the pool and dragged her underwater in front of the visitors. Although the other trainers tried everything to control the orca, Tilikum did not let go of Dawn until an unbelievable 45 minutes had passed. The 40-year-old was then pulled from the water with severe injuries and taken to the hospital. Although a medical team tried everything to save Dawn's life, she died from her injuries later that same day. Afterward, Tilikum was never used in shows again and lived in a secluded pool until he died from a lung infection in 2017. Our next case took place at a workplace where, sadly, far too many deaths happen worldwide, namely on a construction site. This drone footage shows 2 workers involved in the dismantling of a stadium in St. Petersburg. One of the workers, however, released the wrong connecting element of the stadium roof. That meant the structure was no longer load-bearing, and the stadium collapsed within seconds. Tragically, the worker could no longer make it to the rescue basket where his colleague was, and later could only be recovered lifeless from the rubble. Next, we come to the most famous person on this list, who sadly died in the middle of filming a television series. Steve Irwin, known around the world as the Crocodile Hunter, was fatally attacked by a stingray on September 4, 2006 during filming. The animal's barb pierced the heart of the then 44-year-old. The Australian was always aware of the dangers posed by wild animals. That is why only seconds after the attack he said to his cameraman, "I'm dying." With the death of the famous Australian, not only did the era of the crocodile hunter come to an end, but we also lost a true protector of animals. Irwin, who already had a fully grown python as a pet at the age of 6, dedicated his entire life to protecting endangered animal species. Worldwide success and fame meant very little to him because his main focus was always on protecting animals. For example, he and his wife took over his father's zoo and turned it into a breeding center for endangered animals. He also researched new animal species, and in doing so he discovered, among other things, a previously unknown species of turtle that was named after him. Although his family was offered a state funeral for Irwin, they turned the offer down because it would not have been in keeping with Irwin's wishes, as they described him as a normal and down-to-earth kind of person. Instead, he was buried on the grounds of his own zoo, though only his closest family members know exactly where his grave is located there. The footage recorded at the time of the tragic accident was also destroyed at the request of the family. Next, we come to one of the most tragic incidents in the history of basketball. During one of the first games of the NBA playoffs in the year '93, the Celtics player wearing jersey number 35 suddenly collapsed on the court. This player, and at the same time the team captain, was none other than the rising superstar Reggie Lewis. Despite the enormous shock, Lewis survived the collapse, but afterward it was discovered that he had a previously undetected heart defect. On the advice of his medical team, the 27-year-old was ruled out for the rest of the season so he could rest. All the more surprising, however, was that in July 1993, only 2 months after his nearly fatal heart attack, he resumed training. On July 27, 1993, during one of those training sessions, Lewis was in the middle of practicing his feared jump shots when he suddenly collapsed again. This time, however, the doctors could no longer save him, and the professional player died later that same day. At the time, the case sparked a major discussion about performance pressure and health in professional sports, a topic that, sadly, is still often underestimated to this day. Now let's move on to the man who in the 20th century was probably the most famous magician on British television. Tommy Cooper thrilled millions of viewers back then with his clumsy magic tricks and his stand-up comedy. He was so popular, in fact, that he even got his own show. However, Cooper was also a heavy smoker and had a weakness for hard liquor. For that reason, he suffered a heart attack right in the middle of a show in the year 1977, though he survived it. Just like Lewis earlier, however, he also didn't listen to his body, and his substance use even got worse in the years that followed. As a result, his series was cancelled in 1980, and from then on, Cooper only made guest appearances. During one of those appearances on August 15, 1984, just as Cooper was standing on stage preparing to perform a trick, it happened exactly as it had to. He suffered a heart attack and collapsed. At first, the audience even thought the incident was part of his act, but it would be the magician's final performance. Let's continue with a truly tragic workplace death that took place in 2016 in China. We're talking about a 51-year-old factory worker named Chang, who worked in a textile factory in the Chinese city of Taiyuan. One day, two of Chang's co-workers decided to try something risky. They loaded a forklift with a total of 4 tons of thin metal plates, and they knew full well that the forklift's maximum load capacity was only 3.5 tons. To compensate for that, one of the workers even stood on the back of the forklift. But of course, his body weight was nowhere near enough, so the forklift quickly tipped forward. Chang immediately ran over to the forklift and threw her weight against it, but that was a fatal mistake. The forklift kept tipping anyway. Chang slipped and fell underneath the tipping forklift, and then, in that moment, the metal plate slid off the forklift, causing it to slam back down with full force and crush Chang underneath it. Her co-workers still tried to free her, but without success. Chang was dead within 15 seconds. A tragic death that could have been avoided if Chang's co-workers had respected the forklift's load limit, and if Chang had not so recklessly tried to help. May she rest in peace. Next, we come to a tragic case that shows that not only work itself can be deadly, but also the journey to work. Samuel Charles Weisbrun was a successful sales employee at the tech company CB Insights in New York City. On August 22, 2019, Sam wanted to head to the office just as he did every morning. To do that, he took the elevator from his rental apartment on the 22nd floor of the Manhattan Promenade Building, a luxurious apartment complex, down to the ground floor. But then something horrific happened. Just as Sam was trying to step out of the elevator, it suddenly dropped. The falling elevator crushed Sam, and the 30-year-old died instantly on the spot. And then came the shocking part. Afterward, dozens of residents from the same building contacted the police and said the elevators had already malfunctioned many times before. But the building management had failed to arrange a safety inspection in time. When journalists then tried to confront the building staff, they simply threw them out of the building. A tragic case that shows that the stupid mistakes of other people can also cost you your life if you're unlucky. The next death on our list proves that sports really can be murder. It happened during the Winter Olympics in Vancouver in the year 2010. Shortly before the competition, the then 21-year-old professional bobsledder, Noda Komaritashvili, took part in a final training run. He wanted to test the demanding track one last time. At first, everything went well, and he recorded his fastest time on that track so far, all the way up to the 16th and final curve. He entered that curve at a speed of 144 kilometers per hour and suddenly slammed into the wall near the top. The impact threw him so far off balance that he was launched out of his sled, so high that his body left the track, flew through the air, and then slammed unprotected into a steel support at the edge of the course. The 21-year-old, who would have made his Olympic debut just 2 days later, lost consciousness immediately and later died from his injuries. Afterward, there was a great deal of debate about what had caused the accident and why Nodar had been going so much too fast in the final curve. Some experts said the track had simply been built too fast. Other observers said that only his inexperience had cost him his life because he had not braked in time. The next tragic but also stupid death on our list happened in 2021 on the deck of a ship belonging to the shipping company MSC. But to understand it, you need to know one thing. When mooring and docking a ship, there is an area on deck that under no circumstances should be entered, the so-called snapback or whiplash zone. In that zone, the mooring lines or anchor chain can lash around with brutal force. That is exactly the rule the man sitting on the railing in this clip did not follow. He was right in the whiplash zone while the ship was being moored, and then disaster struck. Without warning, the mooring line snapped violently and slammed the man to the deck. He suffered severe injuries and internal bleeding, which cost him his life after several days in the hospital. In the year 2022, the 27-year-old was a rising performer on the platform. In order to create new content for her fans, she met up at the time with two male performers at the Mont Blanc Hotel in the Brazilian city of Nova Iguaçu. The plan? The three of them wanted to film an intimate threesome scene on the balcony of their hotel room. But during the scene, a fatal accident occurred. During the shoot, she apparently lost her balance and fell several meters to her death. Despite immediate medical assistance, she died from her injuries a short time later. The men were able to credibly show that it had been an accident. Apparently, Anna Polly had already arrived at the meeting quite drunk. Even so, her case shows how dangerous it can be when creators feel pressured to do more and more extreme, more spectacular, and ultimately riskier things in order to stand out on the internet. For the next case, we go back to New York City and come to a story that shook the world last year. On December 4th, 2024, Brian Thompson, the busy CEO of United Healthcare, one of America's largest health insurance companies, was on his way to an investor conference held by his company. But he would never get there. Out on the open street, the millionaire executive was fatally shot by a masked attacker using a suppressed 9mm pistol. Afterward, the search for the perpetrator, the 26-year-old student Luigi Mangione, relied on countless surveillance camera recordings from New York. 5 days later, he was arrested in a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. At the time of his arrest, he was carrying a 3D printed weapon, a suppressor, and a manifesto criticizing the US healthcare system, and this also gave insight into his motive. Under Thompson's leadership in the years before, United Healthcare had begun denying numerous insurance benefits. As a result, people in need often received no help with life-saving treatments, even though they were insured. Mangione experienced this firsthand. He suffers from a chronic spinal condition that worsened after a surfing accident in 2022. He too received no support from United Healthcare, which reportedly ruined him financially. Mangione has since been charged with murder and other federal crimes. The case has not yet gone to final judgment, but prosecutors are seeking the death penalty in his case, which is already fueling fierce public debate in the USA. To the next case, in March 2024, a tragic accident occurred at the popular Phantasialand near Cologne. A mechanic was working on the brand new roller coaster, one of the amusement park's main attractions, when catastrophe struck. A roller coaster car hit the man at full speed. Sadly, the accident cost him his life. According to reports, the so-called dispatch tone, a warning signal for approaching trains, had not sounded, which meant the employee had no chance to get to safety. Finally, we come to a workplace where it almost seems impossible that someone could die there, namely the supermarket. But that is actually not the case, because time and again there are incidents in which supermarket employees lose their lives, usually for foolish reasons. In the year 2009, for example, a supermarket worker in the USA vanished without a trace. 10 years later, remodeling work was due to take place, and a shocking discovery was made. The lifeless body of the missing worker had been wedged behind a freezer the entire time. The employee must have fallen behind the unit in some stupid accident and then been unable to free himself. But things like that do not happen only in the USA. In England, for example, an employee of a well-known supermarket accidentally locked himself in the cold room and died there. In Germany, on the other hand, a supermarket employee died a few years ago because he accidentally fell into a trash compactor. Next, we come to a death that is especially shocking because it shows just how close pure joy and unspeakable suffering can be. On April 28, 2023, 34-year-old Samantha Miller and 35-year-old Eric Hutchinson exchanged vows in a romantic ceremony on the beach at Folly Beach in South Carolina. They celebrated with their guests in high spirits and then late in the evening, under the applause of those guests, set off in a golf cart toward a beach house where they wanted to spend their honeymoon. The place they were staying was only a stone's throw away from the party location. But what happened next shocked not only the wedding party, but people all around the world. Just a few minutes after leaving the celebration, the two were hit with full force by a car driven by an apparently drunk 25-year-old woman. She was racing through a traffic zone at more than 100 kilometers per hour, even though only 40 kilometers per hour were allowed there. Tragically, the bride Samantha was killed in the crash, still wearing her wedding dress. Her husband Eric and the other two occupants of the golf cart were seriously injured and taken to the hospital. It was the tragic end of a day that was supposed to become the happiest day of their lives. Let's continue with one of the strangest deaths of all, whose backstory was so bizarre that it spread all around the world. We mean the case of the American Mike Hughes, who was undone by a dangerous idea. Mike Hughes was a convinced flat earther. In other words, he did not believe the Earth was a sphere, but was certain that the Earth had to be a flat disk. For years he thought about how he could prove his crazy theory, and eventually he decided on an extreme measure. He built his own rocket that was supposed to shoot him thousands of meters into the sky. Once up there, Hughes wanted to gather proof that the Earth really is flat. On February 22, 2020, the time had come. After years of tinkering, Hughes set up his rocket in the Mojave Desert in California and launched it. But then came the shock. Right after launch, the parachute broke away from the rocket far too early, even though it was meant to bring the rocket safely back down. Hughes's rocket shot hundreds of meters into the air and then fell straight back to the desert floor without any braking. He died that day without ever disproving his theory. Let's continue with one of the most extraordinary deaths in history, one that remains just as fascinating as it is shocking to this day, because the Buddhist monk Shinnokai Shonin actually died through self-mummification. First, he lived for 1,000 days on nothing but nuts, seeds and roots. On top of that came hours of daily meditation. Then came an even harsher phase. From that point on, his diet was limited to tree bark and a poisonous tea made from the lacquer tree, which killed parasites and preserved the tissue. In the final phase, Shinnokai Shonin had himself buried alive. In a tiny stone chamber, barely bigger than his lotus position, he spent the last days or weeks of his life in constant meditation. Through a tube, he received air, and with a small bell, he gave a sign of life every day. But one day, the bell fell silent. The chamber was then sealed and only reopened 1,000 days later. The astonishing thing was that the body was actually almost completely intact. The mummification had succeeded. To this day, the mummy of Shinnokai Shonin can therefore be seen in Dainichibo Temple in Zudokoka, where he is venerated as a Buddha. Worldwide, there are only about 20 known mummies of this kind, because the practice was banned in the 19th century. The next death on our list also shocked the world because it concerns the tragic death of a young child. The 11-year-old girl from Belgium we are talking about suffered from cystic fibrosis, a congenital, incurable metabolic disease that gradually destroys the lungs and digestive system. There was no hope left for the little girl to recover. Because of the fatal diagnosis, the girl therefore decided to end her life at the age of just 11 through active euthanasia. In fact, since a law change in the year 2014, Belgium has been the first and so far the only country in the world to allow active euthanasia for minors without any age limit. The requirement is that a fatal illness is present, the child is capable of making the decision consciously, and everyone involved, including the parents and doctors, agrees. Despite the strict conditions, the law continues to trigger heated debate again and again. In the next shocking death on our list as well, the person who died was very young. We are talking about Hope Barden from Great Britain. Hope Barden was 21 years old, intelligent, full of life, and worked as a caregiver for people with learning disabilities. To earn a little extra money alongside her studies, she offered erotic live streams through an online platform. One of her regular customers was Jerome Dangar, a 45-year-old pub owner with a preference for extreme roleplay. Over time, he persuaded Hope to engage in more and more dangerous practices, including so-called breath play, the intentional restriction of breathing for sexual arousal. What many people do not know is that this form of asphyxiation for pleasure can be life-threatening, especially when done alone. During a live session in March 2018, catastrophe struck. Hope accidentally strangled herself live on camera and lost consciousness. Even though Dangar watched everything happen live, he did nothing and simply kept watching. The case shocked all of Great Britain and also led to severe legal consequences for Dangar. He was supposed to be charged with manslaughter because the prosecution agreed that he bore responsibility for Hope Barden's death through encouraging the extreme practices and failing to help. But he was never convicted because he died before the trial could begin. Next, we come to one of the oldest deaths ever captured on camera. We are talking about the tragic death of Franz Reichelt, who in France was also known as the Flying Tailor. In the early 20th century, Franz Reichelt was a tailor in Paris, but not just any tailor. He was an inventor, a real tinkerer, with an obsession for flying. His great goal was to develop a garment that could save pilots if they fell from great heights, so basically a wearable parachute that you could wear like a coat. He called his invention the parachute coat, a mixture of coat and sail that was supposed to unfold during the jump. The problem was that all of his function tests with dummies failed. Even so, Reichelt was convinced if you just jumped from high enough, it would work. So in the year 1912, he registered for an official test jump, and in fact from the first level of the Eiffel Tower. On February 4th, 1912, wearing his strangely puffed-up parachute coat, he climbed over the railing of the platform and jumped the 57 meters down with the words, "À bientôt," meaning "see you soon." But his parachute coat failed this test as well. Reichelt hit the frozen ground with full force only seconds later and was dead on the spot. Let us know in the comments which death shocked you the most. Reichelt hit the frozen ground with full force only seconds later and was dead on the spot. Let us know in the comments which death shocked you the most.